My name's Simon Woolley, Lord Simon Woolley, and I'm your host and your chair for the next 40 minutes or so. I want to introduce our great panel for a very, very lively discussion, no holds barred. We need to talk straight. I first want to introduce Tinisha Agramonte. Can you unmute yourself and introduce yourself, where we're speaking to you from, or what organization, company you belong to?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. First and foremost, I'm so incredibly honored and humbled to be serving on this panel with my esteemed panelists. So to you, Lord Woolley, good afternoon. I greet you from the great state of Maryland in the United States. And again, I'm the Chief Diversity Officer for Motorola Solutions, and just so incredibly excited to be here with all of you today.
Thank you very much. Can I now introduce Vijay, Raghavan?
Thank you, Lord Woolley. My name is Vijay Raghavan. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer for LexisNexis Risk Solutions Group. Been with the company for almost 19 years, and more recently I was asked to serve as the Executive Sponsor for Race and Diversity at my organization. Very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much. So to stateside, last but not least, Dr. Nneka Abulokwe. Correct me about my pronunciation, please.
That always happens, doesn't it?
It does.
It's a pleasure to be here, Lord Simon. And it's Nneka. I am in London with you here. So on this side of the Atlantic, it's such a pleasure to be part of this panel and discussing this really topical issue. I'm the CEO and founder of MicroMax Consulting, a boutique consulting firm that focuses on governance, tech, digital, and also a bit of diversity. I also serve as a non-executive director on boards. I provide board advisory services, but serve as a board director for Cambridge University, the Audit and Risk Committee, as well as the Davies Group. I am part of the non-executive for the board and also the chair for the Diversity and Inclusion Committee.
Thank you very much. And I see you got a color code today. You saw the memo. Black is black.
I did. We did.
We did. Well, look. Thank you for taking time out. And so we've got London and the USA, and a rich conversation to be had. I mean, look, the topic of this subject is predicated on diversity and inclusion, but that area in which we have seen, particularly in the USA, and sadly to say in the UK too, and that is the polarization of communities, of ideas, of people, and how do we acknowledge it, address it, and bring people to a shared space in which things can work a lot better. And I often think with these types of subjects, then you need honest conversations. You need to lay bare the uncomfortable truths, the elephant in the room, if you like. And then when you can confront that, then we're better placed to deal with it in an effective way. So I want to dive straight in, and Tinisha, I want to call upon you first from where you're sitting and viewing things. And what do you think are the best ways that you've found to bring opinionated and disparate people together in your workspace? How do you do that? And how do you, one, acknowledge it and then bring about that process of change?
So I like to do something I call the CDC model. That's first find a commonality, then explore our differences, then come back to our commonalities. So I'm going to share a quick little story of where this has worked for me. I remember when I was in college, and at the time, I had only lived around Black and Brown communities, African Americans and Hispanics, working class community, raised by a single teen parent. So I'm giving you that context just so you know that was my lived experience with just that narrow perspective from those dimensions. So when I went to college, predominantly white college, I was in a sociology class. And I remember this like it was yesterday, even though this was like 30 years ago. We were having a conversation on how parents discipline their children. Now,
Right.
this is something I think we can all relate to because we all have a parent-child relationship, right?
And we all have an opinion, right?
And we all have an opinion. And this was on disciplining. Well, I was raised that you spank the child, right? Like you spare the rod, you spoil the child. That was rooted in my religious beliefs, my working class background, and my race, I thought all this time. So in this classroom of only white peers, I remember I didn't want to say anything because I felt like I would be the lone voice on spanking. Everyone else was like, no, use other behavior modifications. It's hurting the child. You're teaching them anger. And then all of a sudden I heard this voice say, I don't know what y'all talking about, but the way I was raised, you had to go get the switch off the tree. And I looked around and I was like, who said that? Right? And it was a white woman from the South. I had not had a lot of experiences with working class whites from the South. So to hear this perspective, it was the first time that I was exposed to a broader perspective. So 2 points to this story. One is there are people out there who have different experiences and life experience, and we think we're so far apart, right? But that's because we have a narrow life view. This one helped broaden my perspective, but also even with the peers in the class who didn't see the world the way she and I did, what they did for me through their personal story, when they said, Tinisha, I remember being hit and it made me feel small.
You know, and this is something of a journey. You know, it starts with and this is why I always come back to that individual and I use myself as an example. Okay. You have to show up and know that you do have a place. You know, you have been invited into that room. You do have a place. It's all about self-worth. It's all about confidence. And it's all about knowing that you do have value to contribute. You may look different, but that is your own inhibiting factor. Others, you see that, and we often think, you see, that others may not welcome what we have to say, but they're actually looking upon you. I mean, I serve on boards now, and I have to always remind myself that I've been brought in there as a subject matter expert who just happens to be a woman and a Black woman.
Brilliant.
You know, so you are there in your own right. And we have to begin to own that.
It's owning that. Tanisha, I mean, you must be in those situations too. And do you no longer have the invariable imposter syndrome? Do you now own the space? And what does that feel like when you begin to own that space, that you're no longer apologizing for being you?
That is such an awesome question. And I want to follow up on a point that Nneka made, that it really is about a journey, right? Managing imposter syndrome. My background is that I was born to a single teen parent. I was the first in my family to graduate college and the first in my family to enter into a professional work environment. When I first came into the workplace, I felt like a fish out of water, traversing into this land of unknown, uncharted territory. And I constantly felt as if I didn't belong, as if I didn't measure up to my peers who were in those spaces. I didn't graduate from a top tier university. You know, I started in the US, what we call community college. I didn't graduate with a high GPA. So I really had low self-esteem and didn't feel like I belonged there. But I will tell you where the turning point came.
Please.
I remember talking to a colleague of mine, and this is even though I had ascended Lord Simon to the highest rank in the federal government for the US. I still dealt with imposter syndrome. I was invited to serve on a panel. And when they gave the list of prospective panelists, they all had all these letters behind their names. They had authored books. They had been on the speaking circuit on television. And I thought to myself, why do they want me? I don't deserve to be on that stage with them. And when I shared that story to my colleague, she said, Tinisha, I want you to look at me. Throughout your life, there will be a number of people who will doubt you, but you do not get to be one of those people. And so going back to Nneka's point, I had been looking at this all wrong. I had talked about all my deficits, right? Low GPA, not a high tier school, all these things I didn't know, which fork to use, glass to use, right? All these things associated with upper crust. But what I failed to remember is that I was triumphant, that I was my family's trailblazer, that I was getting into spaces that no one in my family had done before, and they were proud of me to be there. So that meant I was resilient, I was resourceful, I had demonstrated grit. And when I looked at myself that way, things changed.
How does that change the game?
It's a huge game changer because, as Nneka said, now I showed up with confidence.
Right.
I deserve to be in this space. I've earned the right to be in this space. And no one else in this room is superior to me, because the fact that I've overcome obstacles says so much about me.
Yeah, the question of the tipping point, it's interesting because to me, in a one-on-one discussion with my peers, by the way, I have a certain political persuasion and I have my peers who are executives who are the opposite, but we get along just fine, right? It's a difference of opinion, and we agree to disagree in many cases because at least it's a factual discussion and it's based on our worldviews. But when it comes to I kind of use this factor of racism versus ignorance. If someone is demeaning you, you can pretty much tell that they're demeaning you because they actually have this thought process that says you are inferior to them. That is a tipping point for me, right? On the other hand, many discussions are not really as stark as that. It's more ignorance, and it could be your ignorance as much as their ignorance, and that's a basis for discussion. A good example was one of my project managers in my organization found that a male colleague was talking over her, right? Now, that is an example of ignorance. He wasn't raised to be a male chauvinist, but he didn't know any better. So she called him out right there and then and said, look, I don't know if you know this, but you're talking over me, and I really would appreciate it if you didn't. He stopped. Right? So that's kind of dialogue that's useful to have in many cases.
Oh.
Yes, I've noticed a huge shift, but I do want to make one comment because I think it's very important. When after George Floyd death and a number of social unrest issues that occurred in the US, we saw a lot of companies move toward hired chief diversity officers, chief inclusion, and all the things that Vijay just talked about. It was very important for us at Motorola Solutions to make sure that we focused inwardly, because a lot of companies focused outwardly, and said what their stance was, what they planned on doing. But many in the community met that with skepticism and cynicism, right? It's like, is this just window dressing? Is this more of a PR stunt? So we started to focus inward. So first thing with them hiring me about 6 months ago, but making sure that we had a strategy that would be sustainable moving forward and making an impact. Because our CEO and our senior leaders realized that we had an opportunity to do better. All companies have opportunities to do better. Right. And so I want to use this opportunity to go back to something that was said earlier, intent versus impact, right? So sometimes intent versus impact, right? Sometimes our intent does not match the impact. Right. And so there are companies who have noble intentions, but the impact falls short. Right. And so I think for us, we're being very deliberate and intentional about making sure that our intent aligns with the impact.